Autistic people are more likely to experience certain mental health challenges than our neurotypical peers. But why is that? Let's find out. Welcome, my friend, and thank you so much for watching. I'm Orion Kelly, that autistic guy. I'm all about providing validation and support for autistic people and their loved ones. Mental health and autism. My friends, let's dive into this very important topic. A topic, in fact, that affects many late diagnosed autistic people. The seemingly complex relationship between autism and mental health. But before we get started, a little bit about my own personal mental health journey. In fact, prior to being diagnosed as an autistic person in adulthood, so later in life, I was 100% feeling rock bottom depressed, struggling with daily anxiety. Now, we now know an undiagnosed autistic person is going to have quite a lot of mental health challenges because we're trying to live a life we were never built to live without actually knowing that's the case. From my point of view, but for my diagnosis, I don't even know where I'd be. So from a depression point of view, my wife herself that she feared for my life leading up to that diagnosis period. It was all too much for me. Anxiety is part of my diagnosis. I was diagnosed as autistic and two types of clinical anxiety. So there's the social anxiety disorder, or whatever they want to call it, SAD, short, and GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. So anxiety is a big part of my life, dealing with it, experiencing it, navigating it. I've been there, my friends. I understand the mental health challenges as an autistic person, let alone an undiagnosed autistic person. Let's talk about the connection, because frankly, autism and mental health are closely entwined. It's just factual. Autistic people are more likely to experience certain mental health challenges than our neurotypical peers. But why? That's the question. One key factor, bottom line, is we're autistic people with an autistic brain. Social and sensory differences, social and sensory challenges. We're also navigating our life, navigating a world not built for us. So everything is going from a neurotypical source, but then having to be filtered, processed, digested, understood by an autistic brain. The whole experience just heightens your stress, heightens your anxiety, heightens your mental health challenges. The whole experience of trying to navigate this alien world. Let me share with you some key findings, some research, some studies, some statistics discussing this very connection. According to some research published in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, it's been found, so not just me talking, that autistic people are at a significantly higher risk of developing co-occurring mental health conditions. And clearly we're talking about at a greater risk than the general non-autistic population. But at a risk of what? Things that you think, things you already know. But the research says things like anxiety, depression, and critically, ADHD. In fact, some studies have actually shown a high prevalence of anxiety and depression in autistic people. So a systematic review and meta-analysis published in JAMA, J-A-M-A Pediatrics, found that around 39% of autistic kids and 55% of autistic adults actually experienced clinically significant, so clinically diagnosable anxiety. Fascinatingly, research has also highlighted the link between sensory sensitivities common in autistic people and the development from those into a diagnosable form of anxiety. In other words, sensory overload and sensory-related stresses actually contribute to anxiety symptoms. But this next connection is actually quite alarming. A study published in JAMA Network Open found that autistic people are actually at a higher risk of suicidal ideation and self-harm when compared to the non-autistic general population. Some research has actually also indicated an increased risk of bipolar disorder amongst autistic people. Now, this study, published in the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, reported that autistic people have a higher likelihood of being diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Critically, several studies have actually highlighted disparities in access to mental health services for autistic people. This is critical, guys. The idea that you can have many studies, research, say autistic people can be at a higher risk, significantly higher risk, of developing co-occurring mental health conditions than the general population, yet in the same research say, but in fact, it's harder to access it. Mental health supports, that is, for autistic people. Hello? Is this thing on? A report by the Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring, ADDM network, found that many autistic kids have unmet mental health needs. Kids, autistic children in the modern day world have unmet mental health needs. Gender differences has also been discussed in this connection between autism and mental health challenges. What do you mean by that? Well, basically, the research has suggested that there may be gender differences in how these mental health conditions are presented in autistic boys or girls. Now, that's clearly going to be a further challenge. I guess a basic example is autistic girls may be more likely to internalize their struggles. What happens? Well, if you're an autistic woman, you know it leads to underdiagnosis or misdiagnosis. Numerous studies also emphasize the impact of mental health conditions on the overall quality of life experienced by an autistic person. Hello, obviously. Now, we've touched on ADHD briefly. In fact, there is some research showing that there is a higher prevalence of ADHD in autistic people compared to, say, the general population. There's one study published in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders found that up to 50% of autistic kids may actually meet the criteria for an ADHD diagnosis. Again, we are living in a world where some autistic people have been told you can't have ADHD and be autistic. That's not true. All right, let's touch on some co-occurring intellectual and developmental disabilities. We well know that autism is not an intellectual disability. It's a neurodevelopmental disability. That does not mean, though, there are not autistic people who have significant or severe, however you want to put it, care and support needs. This can be based on some co-occurring disabilities, intellectual disabilities, for example. Important to state, though, these are co-occurring. Every autistic person is different. You don't need research to say this, by the way, but it's saying this. So autistic people with co-occurring intellectual and developmental disabilities clearly face an increased risk of mental health challenges. Some research published in the American Journal of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities actually highlights the complexity of addressing mental health needs in this particular population of the autistic community. More connections. Autistic people have actually been found to be at an elevated risk of actually experiencing traumatic events. This can be bullying, sensory overload, and this therefore can lead, and does for some lead, to a diagnosable form, the development of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Some research has also indicated that the services that autistic people should receive upon diagnosis, now, we don't mean intervention, we're talking about the kind of therapies that can actually help us. Really, you're diagnosed, off you go, right? But these types of things are really important if they can actually provide us with the things we need, focused support, things that can address the challenges we have as autistic people, but also address the challenges we can have as autistic people with co-occurring mental health conditions. So trying to improve our long-term outcomes by actually providing us with services and supports that actually meet our needs, not interventions that just teach us how to stop being autistic and be neurotypical. But this next one I want to talk about in the connection between autism and mental health challenges may go down like a lead balloon. I don't know. I've said it once, I'll say it again. I am here to provide you, my friend, validation and support as an autistic person, and also validation and support for your loved ones, the loved ones of autistic people. So yes, I'm going there. Parental stress and mental health. I am an autistic person. I have an autistic child. That's a very different experience. I can talk about being an autistic person, how stressful it is, my mental health conditions. I can also tell you that it doesn't exactly help my mental health, my quality of life. Parenting an autistic child. That's not to say I don't love not only my son, but parenting my autistic child. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the challenges of being an autistic person parenting another little autistic person can cause stress. What happens? Parents, carers, support people, partners, my wife, friends of autistic people, yes, that's right, can actually experience increased levels of stress. You're both trying to navigate each other in a world you're both not connected in. Neurotypical brain, autistic brain, increased stress for both of us. We don't ever talk about me, the autistic person. I'm talking about the parent too that might not be autistic. You have to look at both sides here, okay? We're in this together. So that's going to lead to mental health conditions. So the parents of autistic people. For me, I'm an autistic person and a parent. My wife, she is an autistic, right? The partners, my wife. The same stress that I'm experiencing, she may experience or you may experience in different ways, and that may also manifest into mental health conditions. I just want to make sure I put that on the radar. I know some people might find that offensive. I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just trying to be real and honest. There's definitely been some research, and I think you don't need research to say this, but it's really basically put out there that it is actually very important. It's highlighting this need to provide better supports, better resources for parents, carers, support workers, teachers, partners, friends of autistic people to actually navigate the challenges of raising or interacting with autistic kids and frankly, autistic adults. And this is massive. This is key, guys. This is not only about helping, validating, supporting autistic people, but to help them, I also know I need to validate and support the loved ones of autistic people. And that's why I think this is a really important point to make. But now I want to move on to some actual conditions. Let's discuss some of the common mental health challenges faced by autistic adults. So number one, let's start with what I've already said I have as a diagnosis, GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. Many autistic people, certainly many autistic adults who may have partners, may even have children, absolutely struggle on a daily basis with chronic worrying, excessive fears about certain situations, or just basic general anxiety that clearly interferes with our daily life. GAD, one of the most common co-occurring conditions for autistic people. Number two, my second anxiety diagnosis, SAD, social or socialized anxiety disorder. Now I get it. Social interactions and communication is already tricky for all autistic people. It's not like all autistic people don't just have a default setting of feeling anxious in social situations. So I get that. Again, that's a pretty good point to make with regards to the connection between certain types of mental illnesses, mental health challenges, and autistic people. But specifically from a socialized anxiety disorder, you can go even deeper. In these situations, as autistic people, it's hard to navigate. But there's also on top of that added layers, fears of judgment, social expectations, and the dreaded sensory overload in these social interactions. Adding all these challenges up, they can contribute to a clinical diagnosis of that condition. The next common mental health condition that can often impact autistic people is OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And to be clear, OCD can and often does co-occur with autism. Yes, autistic people are often referred to as people who have repetitive or restrictive behaviors, movements, things like that, and that makes sense. But for an autistic person with OCD, sure, that's evident, but they can experience even further challenges. Restrictive thoughts, intrusive thoughts, compulsions, counting, cleanliness, all part of the OCD family. Another common condition, which I've touched on, depression. Navigating a world that simply isn't our world. A neurotypical world, neurotypical brains, you're born with an autistic brain, you don't fit in this world. It's impossible to feel like you fit in, you belong, you're accepted. you have that for a lifetime, what's going to happen? You're going to feel profoundly isolated. It'll become more and more difficult to form and maintain relationships. These experiences, these feelings that are chronic, that are lifelong, can lead to clinical depression for an autistic person. The next common condition, although absolutely separate as a diagnosis to autism, can be very much connected to a diagnosis, and that is ADHD. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or ADHD. That's right, being diagnosed as autistic doesn't mean you can't have these other diagnoses. People think I can't have OCD or ADHD because I'm autistic. That's rubbish. This video is here to simply put on your radar some of the common mental health conditions, challenges that autistic people can and absolutely are diagnosed with, co-occurring conditions. PTSD is another one. So post-traumatic stress disorder. Autistic people experience trauma. Chronic trauma, regular, daily. What do you mean, Orion? Sensory trauma, bullying, harassment, relationship trauma, the environments you're placed in, the experiences you're forced into, meltdowns, shutdowns, burnout. The list really goes on. The point is, for autistic people, they have 100% more than one particular moment in their life that is traumatic. But listen to this fact for the next condition that I want to talk about. Autistic people may be at a higher risk of developing eating disorders. Yep, so eating disorders, clinically diagnosed eating disorders, can be common conditions experienced by autistic people. What do I relate to? Orion, binge eating. Bang, there you go. Yeah, I'm a binge eater. I'm a closet binge eater. Why, Orion? Why? Probably self-esteem issues, probably regulation issues. Sometimes I just get too broken. Other times I just can't help myself. The next condition is a really important one to talk about. And I want to be clear. If any of these conditions are triggering or bringing up any feelings and you need to talk to someone, I highly recommend turning this video off, getting in contact with your loved ones, your parents, your carers, your partners, and hopefully having a chat to them, or if not, reaching out to your general practitioner or to particular worldwide organizations that offer on the phone and online therapies. Because it's really important to watch this, but then do something about it. Because the next condition is exactly the reason why I've just told you that. Yes, it is actually not uncommon for autistic people to also experience self-harm and suicidal ideation as a mental health condition. Bottom line is, the challenges faced by autistic people, we're talking autistic kids, guys, autistic teenagers, autistic young adults, autistic parents. We're talking autistic people, a vulnerable group, is experiencing a life that is triggering in them health conditions where they self-harm. They regulate by hurting themselves. And that's a best case scenario. And in case you're wondering, suicidal ideation, that in essence means you may physically harm yourself, but really you are just bombarding your brain with thoughts of suicide. It's the thought of it, the idea of it. On to the next condition, mood dysregulation. So we know mood regulation, emotional regulation can be really difficult for autistic people. But it's not just we're moody, we're grumpy, those autistic mood swings. No, this actually can manifest into mood disorders, mood dysregulation disorders. Again, another example of common mental health challenges faced by autistic people who are told you can't have these co-occurring conditions. You can't be both or everything, and that's just not true. Have you heard of SPD, sensory processing disorder? This is very common for many people who either relate to the autistic experience or who are autistic. The first thing you're thinking is, hang on, Orion, you're saying if you're autistic, you have sensory processing challenges and issues, but then you're saying there's also sensory processing disorder? That sounds like the same thing. Well, in fact, every autistic person experiences the sensory stuff very differently. In fact, For some autistic people, they might not experience sensory stuff at all, or anything like you've ever experienced. So it's not all autistic people all come under the one umbrella of oversensitized, constantly melting it down over touching something or smelling something. That just is not the case. Important to note, SPD, so sensory processing disorder, isn't actually classified as a mental health condition, like a diagnosable form. It is absolutely acknowledged and recognized as something that will cause quite a lot of mental health challenges. Because, think about it, if you struggle with the sensory processing, it's not going to help your mental state. Another mental health condition that can affect autistic people is selective mutism. Now, you've heard about autistic people who are non-speaking. You may hear some people refer to it as non-verbal. Autistic people can still verbalize themselves, can still express their thoughts and feelings, can still contribute because they can still speak. They just speak in different ways. It's not uncommon for autistic children, in fact, to develop selective mutism. I can relate to this by just living and breathing as a dad, like raising an autistic son. We'll go places, and who was a chatterbox in the car will get to a place, like a social interaction, a new place, a new environment, with people we know, and not only will be like a clip-on koala kind of clinging on, will be completely shut down. So that's selective mutism. They simply choose to not talk, to not express themselves. I always say, just a bit of time to warm up and he'll be fine. And then, guess what? You can't shut him up, right? That's usually about 1 minute before we're supposed to leave. Hey, here he is. Adults can do it. I can still do it. I get put into certain situations and I shut down. I can't and don't want to communicate or talk. But now, how about one that might be slightly more controversial? But in fact, it is less common in autistic people, but not out of the question. And that is bipolar. Bipolar disorder can co-occur in some autistic people. For others, it's a misdiagnosis. Here's another one. Did you know that autistic people may actually be at a higher risk of being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder? But it's not just BPD that's a possibility. Panic disorders can also be common as co-occurring conditions for autistic people. Now again, as an autistic person, if you have a panic attack, or if you panic because of some sort of maybe sensory overwhelm or social overwhelm or something that you're experiencing through your autistic brain, automatically we can say that's you just being autistic. In fact, then everyone would be like that. So there is actually a possibility that it could be a co-occurring condition for you specifically, depending on how you relate to certain issues. Tourette's syndrome, another possible co-occurring condition for autistic people. How about phobias? That's another one. Autistic people can actually develop specific phobias, diagnosable forms of phobia. Really, it's an endless list. A phobia of certain animals, certain places, certain situations, certain objects, clearly linked to a different brain living their life in a neurotypical world. But have you heard about this one? Social communication disorder. In essence, this means you experience profound difficulties with social interaction and communication. Sounds like an autistic experience, right? Okay, it may well be. But is it profound? If it is, it could be a co-occurring condition. Now listen up to this one. Depersonalization or derealization disorder. Some autistic people can actually experience this condition, experience episodes of depersonalization, feeling disconnected from yourself. Man, this sounds like me every day. Or derealization. Basically means you have a feeling that the world, this life you're living in, doesn't feel real. Man, I can relate to this. Another quite common condition that autistic people can also experience is body dysmorphic disorder. Autistic people can go on to develop BDD, which is this obsessive concern about the perceived flaws of your appearance. There's also many learning disorders, like specific learning disorders, that can be common for autistic people. I've talked about a lot of these in other videos, but there's dyslexia, dyscalculia, even dysgraphia. All can co-occur in autistic people. For late diagnosed autistic women who have had children, maybe those children or that child was diagnosed and that triggered your diagnosis. Well, did you know that it is not uncommon for autistic women, autistic mothers, to also experience postpartum depression? And it's been suggested autistic mothers may be at a higher risk of developing postpartum depression because of the way they're experiencing motherhood. So there's the sensory issues, right? There's the extra demands and challenges. There's the societal expectations of how a mother is, how motherhood looks. This can all be really, really challenging. But this next condition may just be one of the harder ones I've ever had to explain, but well worth listening to. Body-focused repetitive behaviors. Body-focused repetitive behaviors. You know, there's a lot of long, sciencey, medical words I'm not going to get into. Breaking it down, hair pulling, that's one. Skin picking. Hello, my old friend. I'm here to pick that skin again. Whether it's anxiety, regulation, sensory issues, this type of stuff. Skin picking, touching, pulling, not uncommon for autistic people. Agoraphobia. Yep, another condition that can be experienced by autistic people. We talk about autistic people having safe places, usually their home. Leaving those safe places is not ever on our list of priorities, but for some with agoraphobia, you actually fear ever leaving your safe place, ever going anywhere into any environment. This can be especially tricky for autistic people who already rely on, need, and don't want to leave their safe place. Have you heard about this one? Another common mental health challenge experienced by autistic people. This one is substance use disorder. In fact, autistic people can be at risk for substance use disorders. Why? Think about our lives again. Some people may think, well, I do it to regulate or relax. Some may refer to it as self-medicating. So this is the issue. This is why these things can be common for autistic people. The bottom line is autistic people may be at a higher risk of using, even overusing, drugs, alcohol, these types of things, as a coping mechanism. Have you checked out my video on OCD and its potential connection to autism? You can watch it now and click on the link to take a brand new questionnaire on the very topic of diagnosing OCD in autistic people.